Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company, and I'm in my garden looking for watermelons in my watermelon patch, and I don't see that many of them. Well, there's a reason for that, and I'm going to get into that exact reason, but before I do, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you're notified anytime we put out a video. Okay, so we're in zone 10, we're in San Diego, and we're about 4 miles from the coast of San Diego, from the actual water. Now, that is very influential in my ability to grow certain crops well, and it really affects my ability to grow melons, watermelons in particular. As you can tell, I have this huge patch here, and it's taken over this whole area, and as I go through and I look, I don't see very many watermelons. In fact, there's just one. I got one little guy over here. Hi, how you doing, little guy? He's pretty tiny. And we're in September, so not a lot of productivity in our garden with watermelons. And why is that? Well, that's because watermelons love heat. Think about some of the states that grow the most watermelon. They're southern states. They're states that get a lot of warm weather for a very long period of time. And even though we're in San Diego and it's an area that is warm for a long period, we're so close to the coast, we're not warm enough throughout the whole entire day to really get really good production on our watermelons. So for any of those of you who are in zone 9 and 10, or any area of the United States that's coastal, it's important to remember that it's hard to grow watermelons. Beefsteak tomatoes can be kind of difficult. Any crop that requires a lot of heat, okra is another one. Although I don't see many of you probably crying about the fact that you can't grow okra, but still, it is a crop that requires heat to do really, really well. So this little experiment here was a little bit of a bust here in the garden, not a big deal. But if you hop over to our Ramona farm, we were producing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of watermelons on our farm. I can't even give them away quick enough. And that's because it's an area that has very hot weather for a long period of time. We're basically really warm from May all the way until August, all the way throughout the day. And what does really warm mean? It means at least above 80 most of the time in the summertime. That's what you need. Here, that doesn't necessarily happen because we get coastal influence in the morning and in the evening. So let's say you're in zone 9 and 10 and you don't have that much coastal influence, you want to grow watermelons. What do you need to know? Okay, well, first of all, it's important to note that watermelons and melons in general need a lot of space. When you look at the back of the packet, it's going to tell you the space between plants. It's going to say like 2 feet, right? That means you plant the seeds 2 feet apart. It doesn't mean it's only going to grow 2 feet. It's going to take over a pretty big area. The beauty is if you have raised beds or if you're doing planter boxes or things like that, you can let the plant spill over onto the ground and run, okay? What's most important is where you plant that seed or that transplant. It's really good soil. There's plenty of compost, nutrients, you've watered. A little bit of granular fertilizer is a good idea because watermelons are heavy feeders. You want to make sure that where you plant the seed or the transplant, that's where the good soil is. Where the plant runs, it doesn't matter. In fact, this is going to run on my sidewalk and all throughout the garden into areas where the soil is pretty terrible. That is okay. As the name infers, watermelons, they need plenty of moisture, okay? It's not a drought tolerant crop. There are some melons that can grow with a little less moisture than others, but in general you need regular irrigation, okay? So we run our irrigation every other day during the summertime. How long you run it depends on the size of your irrigation line and how much water it puts out throughout the season. It's important that you have the right spacing. It's really important that you give your crops the most likelihood of being successful by adding compost, fertilizer, and irrigating regularly. The other thing that's important to know is there's so many different types of watermelons or melons in general. You don't necessarily need something like this that gets absolutely crazy. We have a Kajari melon that's amazing, that's smaller. It grows in a little bit less of a sprawling matter. There's lots and lots of varieties out there, so check them out. but it's really important that you do them in the warm season. Plenty of water, plenty of fertilizer, and the right spacing is gonna set you up for success. Okay, so let's jump in and look at this watermelon here. So this is a Klondike Blue. It's one of my favorite melons. And if you were a brand new gardener, you might get all excited and want to harvest this melon. It is nowhere near being ready. And there is nothing more heartbreaking than growing a melon all season long and then you harvest it too early and then it's terrible because it's not fully ripe. So do not make that mistake. How do you know when to harvest one? Well, there's a lot of different tips and tricks out there, but I always tell people, first and foremost, start with looking at the calendar, okay? Mark when you planted it. So I know that I planted these the third week of June. So I know that they've been in the ground pretty much all of July and August. And these watermelons, I believe they're like 120 days. So I still have quite some time until this is ready. And I know that just because I know when I planted it and when it's gonna be ripe. I always tell people start with that first because that's gonna give you the most information. So let's say you do that and you go, oh gee, I'm about a week within like about a week of when they say it's gonna be ready. Is it ready? Okay, the next thing you wanna do is look at the melon size, look at the color. Is it as big as it's supposed to be? This is nowhere near as big as it's supposed to be, so obviously it's not ready. If it was, then the next thing I would look for is the tendril that is growing right before, where are you at? The tendril that's growing right before the melon, which we have this here. Once this dries up, it's an indicator that no more energy is going to the melon and it's time to harvest it and it's totally ripe. So this one's nowhere near being ready, but don't make the mistake of harvesting one when it's not ready because it will be totally heartbreaking. All right, let's open up this delicious melon. Now, like I said, there's so many different varieties out there. You might be thinking, oh no, Brigitte, you harvested it too early, which wouldn't that be hilarious? But that's not the case. This is our pride and joy. It's called a Dino melon. We've been working on it and it's just literally sugar. So it's a green melon. It's like a honeydew. And oh my God, can you hear that crunch in the microphone? So crunchy, so sweet, absolutely delicious. And part of the reason why it's so good is because I picked it at the peak of its ripeness. So no matter what type of melon you're growing, whether it's a watermelon, whether it's a slip melon, a cantaloupe, honeydew, you name it, the important factor is heat, okay? They need plenty of moisture in the ground, so you can't let them grow in a hot area and not have good moisture in the soil, but they need heat to condense the sugars, and they need plenty of organic matter and fertilizer because look at this. This is a lot for a plant to grow. It's not a tiny little, sprout of arugula. It's a lot of plant material here that has to be grown by the vine. And so you want to make sure the plant has access to plenty of fertilizer in the soil to make this happen.